We want to go to the Word of God this morning, and we're taking our reading from 1 Samuel, the 4th chapter. I'm reading from the New Living Translation, and I have quite a bit of reading to do. I want to read the entire chapter. So if you would indulge me, beginning at verse 1. And Samuel's word went out to all the people of Israel. At that time, Israel was at war with the Philistines. The Israelite army was camped near Ebenezer, and the Philistines were at Aphek. The Philistines attacked and defeated the army of Israel, killing 4,000 men. After the battle was over, the troops retreated to their camp. The elders of Israel asked, "Why did the Lord allow us to be defeated by the Philistines?" Then they said, "Let's bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord from Shiloh. If we carry it into battle with us, it will save us from our enemies." So they sent men to Shiloh to bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord of heaven's armies, who is enthroned between the cherubim. Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of Eli, were also there with the ark of the covenant of God. When all the Israelites saw the ark of the covenant of the Lord coming into the camp, their shout of joy was so loud it made the ground shake. "What's going on?" the Philistines asked. "What's all the shouting about in the Hebrew camp?" When they were told it was because the ark of the Lord had arrived, they panicked. "The gods have come into their camp," they cried. "This is a disaster. We have never had to face anything like this before. Help! Who can save us from these mighty gods of Israel? They are the same gods who destroyed the Egyptians with plagues when Israel was in the wilderness. Fight as never before, Philistines. If you don't, we will become the Hebrew slaves, just as they have been ours. Stand up like men and fight." So the Philistines fought desperately, and Israel was defeated again. The slaughter was great. 30,000 Israelite soldiers died that day. The survivors turned and fled to their tents. The ark of God was captured, and Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons of Eli, killed. A man from the tribe of Benjamin ran from the battlefield and arrived at Shiloh later that same day. He had torn his clothes and put dust on his head to show his grief. Eli was waiting beside the road to hear the news of the battle, for his heart trembled for the safety of the ark of God. When the messengers arrived and told what was happened, an outcry resounded throughout the town. "What is all the noise about?" Eli asked. The messenger rushed over to Eli, who was 98 years old, blind. He said to Eli, "I have just come from the battlefield. I was there this very day." "What happened, my son?" Eli demanded. "Israel has been defeated by the Philistines," the messenger replied. "The people have been slaughtered. Your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were also killed, and the ark of God has been captured." When the messengers mentioned what happened to the ark of God, Eli fell backwards from his seat beside the gate. He broke his neck and died, but he was old and overweight. He had been Israel's judge for 40 years. Eli's daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant and near her time of delivery. When she heard that the ark of God had been captured and that her father-in-law and husband were dead, she went into labor and gave birth. She died in childbirth. Before she passed away, the midwives tried to encourage her. "Don't be afraid," they said. "You have a baby boy." But she did not answer or pay attention to him. She named the child Ichabod, which means, "Where is the glory?" For she said, "Israel's glory is gone." She named him this because the ark of God had been captured, and because her father-in-law and husband were dead. Then she said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured." I want to continue in the next chapter, chapter 5. After the Philistines captured the ark of God, they took it from the battleground at Ebenezer to the town of Ashdod. They carried the ark of God into the temple of Dagon and placed it beside an idol of Dagon. I want to speak this morning on the subject, suffering of defeat that wasn't supposed to happen. Suffering of defeat that wasn't supposed to happen. This lengthy chapter is clearly a very depressing chapter. It's full of tragedy. It speaks about a profound defeat suffered by Israel at the hands of the Philistines, the long-standing enemy of the people of God. It's filled with grief and despair. You've heard me talk in times past that I enjoy movies, and to the point where I wanted to be an actor. Here we go. But I never wanted to be an action hero actor. I wasn't really big on action movies. I like movies, but I was not really a big fan of the action movies, the James Bonds. And there were some good ones that I enjoyed, but as a whole, I would prefer more the horror genre, of course. I didn't like the action movies because they seemed oftentimes far-fetched. One guy takes on the whole Russian government, the mafia, and he comes through without a scratch. I like more the realistic storylines, like werewolves and zombies. That can happen. So I was never really a big fan of the action movies, particularly that of storyline of Batman. Now, I liked the 80s Batman, the remake in the 80s version, and particularly the first remake of the Batman movie. I enjoyed that quite a bit, actually. I thought it was cool. And in fact, I always thought that if I had a little more money and I could buy some of those gadgets, I could be Batman. Why are you laughing? So Batman was okay, but I grew up under the old Batman, from the 60s. And when I was a kid, I liked the old Batman just as much as any other kids. And was glued to the TV sets and watched all the episodes. But of course, as I grew up and matured, it dawned on me that this is kind of stupid. And what made it all the more ridiculous was in every episode, there was an assassination attempt on Batman. And they would try to kill him in some outrageous way. Now, I always was puzzled because, like, why didn't they just shoot him? He's not Superman. And they could have just shoot him. And that would be the end of Batman. But no, they would have all of these gadgets that they would try to kill Batman with big magnifying glasses, things like that. And regardless of the most outrageous ways that they tried to kill Batman, he always managed to get out. There was always a happy ending. No matter how bad things got, he found a way to escape his peril. And such is an extreme, perhaps, of the genres of the action movies, where no matter how bad things get, something seems to flip around and just reverse all of the badness in the storyline. The Bible is not like that. The Bible calls it like it is. You don't see heroes in the Bible outside of God Himself. And while there are some remarkable men and people of God, the Bible is clear that they are often frail, sinners, they can mess up. In other words, things don't always go right, no matter who you are in God. The Bible calls it like it is. The Bible is an accurate mirror to life. Because life sometimes can go very wrong. This is what we see in this chapter. There's no pretense here. There's no spin that you could put on this story. You have ultimate disaster happening to the people of God. In this story, we go to a map of Israel. Israel at this time, this is before the divided kingdom, the nation of the Philistines was in this area, and there was a long running antagonistic turmoil between these two nations. There was always a back and forth between these two nations. Now, the Philistines had many gods, as was common. They had several gods, but there was one main god by the name of Dagon or Dagon. Dagon was often portrayed as a merman, as opposed to a mermaid, which is female. He was thought to be a fish god. Now that's not to say that it was all about fish, because actually he was also believed to be responsible for grain and agriculture. And we don't know a whole lot about Dagon, but we see through some of the histories where he is portrayed as this fish god. He was an important god, and he was seen to be their chief god and the source of their power and their victories. This was the god that they parade before the other nations. This is the god that they would worship. When Joshua took over the Canaanite lands, there was actually a city named after this god, Beth Dagon, or the house of Dagon. We read about Dagon in the story of Samson. Now the lords of the Philistines gathered together and offered a great sacrifice to Dagon their god, and to rejoice. They said, "Our God has delivered into our hands Samson, our enemy." We know the story in Judges with Samson, when they captured him and blinded him. They paraded him in the temple of Dagon. We know that story did not end well for the Philistines, as God used him and he brought down that temple. Many, many years later, he would be shown in the battle of David and Goliath. That famous battle, "Am I a dog?" He roared at David, "that you come at me with a stick?" And he cursed David by the names of his gods. One of those, without a doubt, was the god Dagon. Many years after that, King Saul, the first king of Israel, along with Jonathan, David's best friend, were once again at war with the Philistines. And they were killed. And we are told that they put his armor, King Saul's armor, in the temple of their gods and fastened his head in the temple of Dagon. So there was a long-running animosity and tension and hostility between the Philistines and Israel. And often came down to the battle of the God, with the Yahweh, the God of Israel, against Dagon, the God of the Philistines. Here in this story, one of the most tragic outcomes in that battle. Here in one day, 30,000 men were killed in a battle with the Philistines. Eli's two sons, who were priests and leaders of Israel, were killed in this battle. Eli, who was the prophet and the leader of Israel for 40 long years, falls back and breaks his neck, and he is dead. One of Eli's sons, Phinehas' wife, dies in childbirth. And worst of all, the Ark of the Covenant had been captured and taken by the Philistines and set up in the temple of Dagon. Now, the Ark of the Covenant was a very important item. It was not an idol. He did not worship it. But it was designed by God himself through the hand of Moses, given specific instructions on its construction. Inside the ark, which was basically a large wooden chest covered in gold, the Bible tells us inside of that was a jar of manna, Aaron's staff that had budded, and the stone tablets of the covenant. The ark of God, particularly before there was even a temple, was a concentrated point of contact between heaven and earth. The ark of God represented the presence of God. The ark of God represented the protection of God. And the ark of God represented the power, the glory, and the majesty of their God. When they entered into the land of Canaan under Joshua, they would carry this ark into their battles. And whenever they entered a battlefield with the ark of God, which served as the protection of God, the presence of God, and the power of God, they would end up with the victory. One of the stories of the walls of Jericho, we're told likewise that they marched around the walls with the ark of God. And now here, with all of this history in one day, in the line of all of these disasters, the ark was now captured by the enemy, taken away, and put in a pagan temple. The wife of Phinehas would die, giving birth, and she said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured." This was not supposed to happen. They've been in many battles before. There were many times when things didn't go exactly as planned, but never had they, when they brought the ark before them, that they would suffer this kind of defeat. Never could so many things go wrong in one single day than what happens here. And they, like us, when these things happen, cry out, why? Why would God allow this kind of disaster? Why would God allow something like this that should have never happened? The Bible tells us that a man that is born a woman is a few days full of trouble. We can handle a layoff from a job. But sure, people know that things like that happen. As sad as it may be, when grandma passes away, we understand that things like that happen. But then there are things that are so horrific, so traumatic, that you don't expect them to happen. You don't expect to hear that a 6-year-old girl would be snatched off of the streets, molested, murdered, and thrown into a dumpster. Things like that aren't supposed to happen. When we see terrorists flying airplanes into buildings, taking out thousands of people in one day's time, things like that aren't supposed to happen. How do we process not bad days, not misfortunes? How do we process those kinds of defeats and disasters that should not be apparent in our lives? They ask the question, why? Now, we have information about some of the players here. For instance, those two sons. The Bible says now the sons of Eli were scoundrels who had no respect for the Lord or for their duties as priests. Now Eli was very old, but he was aware of what his sons were doing to the people of Israel. He knew, for instance, that his sons were seducing young women who assisted at the entrance of the tabernacle. These two sons of Eli, who were priests, were hypocrites and apostates, who didn't know the Lord and were abusing the people of God and defiling the tabernacle worship. So maybe it was judgment. Maybe this was the result of that. And while I don't doubt that judgment was certainly called for, including from Eli, who was aware of this and didn't do anything about it. But the fact of the matter is, while there are reasons for everything, we don't always know what those reasons are. And I know church folks like to put simple answers on difficult circumstances. I know church folks like cliches, but God will never place on you more than you can take. But when you are going through that kind of pain, those cliches don't always mean a lot. She named him Ichabod, for the glory of the Lord has departed. From her perspective, and from the people at this time, they saw that God had finally abandoned them. God had walked away. God was no longer in power. Personal crisis can often distort current realities. When you're going through serious trials and tribulations, it may feel like God has left, and you will struggle for an answer to why this kind of disaster happened. We see this in the time of Jesus. He comes upon a blind man, and they asked him, as Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who was blind from birth. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sin or his parents' sins? Jesus says it is not because of his sins or his parents' sins. Jesus answered, this happened so that the power of God could be seen in him. This is not to say that there was no sin involved in this man or his parents. But sometimes things will happen in your life to give God the opportunity to express his miracles. God will often move you from the difficult to the impossible in order to manifest his glory. When we look into the next chapter, we have more information, because if we only read chapter 4, we might conclude the same things that they conclude. That God somehow has become impotent. God somewhere along the line has abandoned them. What worked in the past is no longer available to the people of God. If we only had chapter 4, we may assume that they were right. God is not in charge. God is not all powerful. God has been defeated. God was unable to give victory. But in chapter 5, we read, after the Philistines captured the ark, they took it from the battleground at Ebenezer to the town of Ashdod. And they carried the ark of God into the temple of Dagon and placed it beside an idol of Dagon. But when the citizens of Ashdod went to see it the next morning, Dagon had fallen with his face to the ground in front of the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and put him in his place again. But the next morning, the same thing happened. Dagon had fallen face down before the ark of the Lord again. This time, his head and his hands had broken off and were lying in the doorway. Only the trunk of his body was left intact. I find it interesting that at a time when there have been debate about whether or not certain statues should be brought down, and while I do not see that as necessarily an invalid debate to have, it's interesting to note that no one No human being had to bring down this statue. God himself brought down this statue. And making it clear. And I'm thankful for chapter 5. Because it tells us, yeah, it may look like God lost his power. But chapter 5 lets us know that he is still on his throne. That there is still the power of God that all principalities and powers must bow down to. Don't ever confuse or assume because trouble comes into your life that God has lost his power. I find it interesting how the people responded. Because here when they saw what happened, their reply was, we can't keep the ark of God of Israel here any longer. It's amazing. Because here it shows who the true God is. And their response was, we got to get rid of it. There it tells them in the next verse that they need to move it out of their place. There you have the true God. You would think that they would say, well, it's clear that Dagon is not the real God here. It's clear that the real power is in Yahweh, the God of Israel. But instead, they say, we got to get rid of this God because he's more powerful than us. It's amazing. Then when they are confronted with the choice to choose between the real and the false, they opt to keep the less powerful God. It reminds us of the time of Jesus where it says he came to his own, but his own did not receive him. Here it is God in the flesh, and yet they didn't recognize him. He says none of the rulers of this age understood it, but if they had, they would have not crucified the Lord of glory. But what happens when we find ourselves in battles that we lose? What happens when it seems like God is no longer on the throne? When it seems like our prayers are not being heard? Faith is believing when the evidence seems to be absent. Faith becomes evidence needed in certain times. You use faith when there's no evidence around. But trust is believing when the evidence actually seems to be against you. When it seems like God is not answering. When it seems like he has forgotten you. When it seems like he's no longer listening to you. That's the time to lean on and trust God. When you have that kind of trust and determination, you say like Paul, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress? Shall persecution or famine? Or nakedness or peril or the sword? There are going to be times when it seems like God is no longer listening. You're going to find yourself at times saying, why do I have to go through this? Why are these things happening to me? It's easy to know what to do when God is blessing you. No one has to tell me how to act when he's healing me. No one needs to tell me how to act when he's blessing me. But when it seems like he's not answering my prayers, when it seems like he's gone from me, when I'm suffering trials and tribulations that don't seem to make sense, that's the time when you feel like giving up. That's the time when you feel like turning around, because it seems like God has walked out on you. But I come to tell you that no matter what you go through, no matter how bad things get, You can always know that He'll never leave you. He'll never forsake you. He'll be with you always to the end of time. That's why I can say I've come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord, trusting in His every word. And when I'm up against the ropes and I feel like giving up, I can know that God is still there. I know that He still hears me. It may seem like He has left me. It may seem like He is gone. But I serve a God who will never leave you. He'll always be there. Even though I'm down and out, He'll restore my joy. He'll come back and hear my prayers. He will never let me go. It may not happen the way I want, but He'll hold on to me when it seems like I'm gone. He'll hold on to me when I feel like giving up. He'll never let me go. I can press on and hold on to God even when I'm in defeat.